Good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us again on another edition of Reasonable Doubt, brought to you by the Harris County Criminal Lawyers Association. Hope you all had a happy Thanksgiving. I'm your host, Jimmy Ardwan, and he has made it through. Julio Vela, back with the hair looking good.
Hey, man.
You don't look like you put on too much weight.
You know, I ate so much tryptophan. I'm exhausted. I'm still exhausted. Mm-hmm. But when my co-host nails the federal government with and gets a big fat dismissal, and I get to sit next to the two lawyers who ran the biggest case in the last 4 or 5 months in the state of Texas, it's a good day. I don't really got to do much.
Yeah, we got Casie, Gotro, and Thomas Lane here tonight, ladies and gentlemen. Thomas drove in all the way from San Antonio to be on our show.
Hey, it sounded like fun.
Well, get ready, man, because the next hour is going to be rip-roaring fun. Casie and Thomas, of course, they tried, for those of you who were following along in the news, they tried the first of the Twin Peaks biker cases to go to trial, got a mistrial. We'll be talking with them this evening about that. We will be taking your phone calls, 713-807-1794. That's the number. You go off, you eat a bunch of turkey, and you forget the number right away. So we'll open up the phone lines about halfway through the program, so you can call in with your questions and comments. I also have Twitter up right here, so you can send me anything you got at HCCLA_TV, and we'll do this for the next hour. But guys, before we talk about your trial, because that's the main reason why you're here, I want to talk about what's been going on here in the news lately with all of the sexual harassment in the workplace and politics, mostly in the media. You've had all the celebrities, Harvey Weinstein. Just this week, Matt Lauer gets fired. Was it last week? It was Charlie Rose. I'm interested to, and Casie, I'm particularly interested to hear your position of it because let's just say you're known for having an opinion on things. You're a pretty strong female advocate, but you're also a criminal defense lawyer. And so I wonder from your perspective, and Thomas and Julio, I want you guys to chime in too, we're seeing a lot of old allegations that are coming up. Stuff that is 2, 3, 4, 10, 20, 30 years old that's now coming out. It's coming out against politicians, it's coming out against celebrities, and a lot of it has been focused on the females coming out against males and reporting sexual harassment or inappropriate contact in the workplace, and in some cases sexual assault. And so I just kind of want to get your opinion, everybody, from the perspective of a practicing lawyer. This stuff's all over the media. How do we reconcile perhaps our personal feelings about what the victims, the complainants are doing, and they're coming out, and reconcile that with what we have to go through in terms of defending our clients on these allegations? I mean, this puts us, I feel like this is one of those things you really have to question a jury about because of the constant bombardment of exposure that they're getting every day in the media on this. You're stumped. I stumped you.
Well, it's interesting. I have a colleague of mine actually right now that had a personal experience very similar to what you've just described, what's in the media. Mm-hmm. And I think that for women, certainly, if you, as a woman in a field that is dominated primarily by men, it is not easy to take an unpopular position. And what I have seen is men in power using that power to take some advantage, clean advantage in some cases. And to me, as a woman, it makes sense why charges aren't pursued, why she doesn't say anything, because you run some very serious risks of being ostracized and foregoing an entire career. So that is a difficult issue for me personally, because there's what I know about what it's like to have to work in a male-dominated field,
right,
and then what I know as an advocate and having to combat what I see, what my jurors are going to hear in the media. And you see it too.
Yeah.
You know, they're tried and convicted before we even know when this happened.
Well, I mean, like with Matt Lauer, I mean, he's immediately fired. The stories start coming out, and they're bad. I mean, the stories are bad, but there's been no trial. There's been nothing. Nobody's had to really put on any evidence and meet a burden of proof other than the New York Times and Variety magazine have been able to basically, scare NBC into a reactionary firing from my point of view. And granted, the allegations are bad, but how do you reconcile something like that with what we have to do? I mean, in terms of, if you're questioning a jury, if you've got a client who is accused of sexual assault, I mean, how do you reconcile that? It's tough because I believe that, look, some of the stuff, you look at some of the interviews that Lauer did, they're creepy. They're just creepy.
He's creepy.
Yeah, and so I mean, it's not hard to believe. And so, if I as somebody who represents people in court and tries to poke reasonable doubt in things is already having that thought in my mind, it's like, what is the jury panel that I might have thinking?
I have to, and this is from.
And feel free to chime in. Don't just sit there in silence, man. Bust your way right in.
Yeah.
Some subjects I just try to stay away from.
Not on this show, man. We go right in.
He also may be still a little shell-shocked, but what I saw, even in Waco, we had 300 people for our panel, and we had like an 8-page questionnaire, and there were a number of women specifically that said that when asked if there was any reason why they didn't want to be on the jury, said, I'm afraid of retaliation. And ostensibly from my client and or the club that he belonged to.
Yeah.
And what I found is when we brought those folks back into chambers to talk about it, readily confessed that I watched too much TV. And you know what? I think I can stay open. And one woman in particular ended up staying on our jury and was Jake's biggest advocate. So I think that there's a knee-jerk reaction to see the thing on the television set and to formulate some opinions, but given an opportunity in a setting where it's like this to think critically about it, I have, and I might be a little pie-eyed in the sky, but I've found jurors very willing to set that aside.
I hate to say, oh well, as a woman, how was it dealing with it in Waco? Because I think just as an advocate, I hate the fact that we asked this question, but you have been a pillar and a beacon for women's strength in a male-dominated field, okay? At least in the community here in Houston, Casie Gotro is somebody who stands up for and represents for the systematic decades of male-dominated power here in Houston. And so I'm going to ask it, did you feel that in Waco, and how are you receiving that now, and do you feel that? Because I'm telling you, from an outsider looking in, Casie Gotro, number one in my book, and in most books, says advocate, period, number one. But number two, oh yes, and she happens to be a woman, but that secondary thing means a lot to a lot of people. And so, did you feel that in Waco? Did you feel that coming through, and how have you dealt with that in your career?
I'll tell you that in my experience, the folks and I'm thinking about judges, I'm thinking about prosecutors, like the folks that I've had to work with in this field that are good at their jobs and are doing their jobs, right? Whether it's seeking justice or being unbiased and neutral in their decision making. I don't get singled out for being a woman. It's when I'm dealing with someone that is perhaps, it's a low blow. It's a low blow. Like at some point, I remember the prosecutor saying, oh, the best prosecutor in the room today had on a skirt. And, that came back to bite him in the butt. I can't cuss, can I? That's a bad idea. Okay.
I think it's a little bit.
Okay. So
I don't think you can.
You say ass.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, it came back to bite him in the ass. But I'm acutely aware of it. I was certainly the only woman in the well that was doing any work, and it for us in our case, because the state's theory was that these banditos are sexist and misogynistic and just loathe women, and then I have 6'5" of bandito sitting next to me that has taken the most important decision in his life,
Right.
and put them in these hands.
Right.
So I don't know how to answer that question really, except to say that when the people that are good at their jobs, that are doing their jobs, don't get distracted by the fact that we use different bathrooms. That comes up when somebody's losing and needs to.
What about the article that was written about you during the trial, where there was?
Oh.
Yeah, I mean I don't know.
Well, which article, right?
Well, the one.
Right, which one?
Yeah,
right?
I mean there was a ton of, but I mean there was the one that kind of focused on your mannerisms in the courtroom.
The bouncy one.
Yes, yes, like.
bouncy.
Yeah, and it was, the reporter. Everybody joked, well, Casie has a stalker kind of thing, but parts of it were, almost like, and this is historically, I think, a problem with a lot of female lawyers who are very aggressive, is that, reporters or other people view it as a bad thing, whereas if a male did it and did the same exact thing you did, they would be cheered for it.
So I kind of drown that noise out, and my litmus test is often, what would Dan Cogdale do in this situation?
I like it.
Because
I like it.
Dan Cogdale is kind of who I want to be when I grow up, and if Dan can do it, damn it, I can do it. And I tend to drown out the rest of that noise. Like I don't notice it.
You said you had an 8-page questionnaire. Was that, juror questionnaires, at least in state practice, is not something that I'm very familiar with or experienced. Is that something that you say an 8-page questionnaire, is that a court questionnaire? Is that something that you and the prosecutor were able to kind of bang out?
It was the craziest, Thomas, it was. So there was this, so going into the case, I came on late, like March 23rd of this year was my first appearance on the case, and I did my due diligence. I spoke to all the lawyers that had other clients in the case, and I was consistently told, you've got to change venues. We're not going to get a fair jury. You need to change.
Because that's up to you.
Right. Because it's completely up to me and my magic wand.
Yeah. Just wave my venue wand.
So they brought in like 300 veneermen. We had this ridiculous 8-page questionnaire that, frankly, it gets so long at some point, it's useless. You have to make this rapid decision about who gets on and who doesn't. Like it just stopped being effective at some point, and we didn't even make it past the first quarter.
No, we had this ridiculous chart of, checks and minuses and all these different symbols that, when we're sitting there trying to make, intelligent strikes, it's just impossible to read.
It was impossible to read, and then so. What's the question, Jimmy? It's just
the 8-page questionnaire.
It was Julio's question.
Sorry.
I remember about.
Hurts to turn
I actually think it caused us more stress than helpful in a lot of situations. And I say that because we looked back at it after the fact, and we said, "Wow, we let this guy get onto the jury." And we looked at his questions with a magnifying glass. And we saw that, wow, that's not good for us, and neither is this. Oh, he's not good on Fifth Amendment rights, or whatever the issue was. And we were really sweating that for a while.
But at the end of the day, they all came back to the same thing, and that was that Jake was a great guy. He killed it in his direct examination. Like, when asked if he was a bandito, I am, and I hope to be buried in this cut. I'm not a criminal.
Wow.
And unapologetic. And just a phenomenal human being. Honestly, the best evidence, the best asset that we had was Jake.
And to tie that back into this idea of the court of public opinion, I remember talking to people, before the trial, during the trial, when I was back in San Antonio in bits, and everyone was just telling me, oh, y'all are sunk, and I felt like we were on very strong, very firm legal ground, regarding this, this is he a member of a gang issue that came up, and it was a central issue of the trial.
Thomas, did you have any idea what you were stepping into?
Of course not. Of course not.
Really, did you have any idea what you were getting into?
Of course not. No. It was like drinking from a fire hose, right? And that's Casie Gotro.
So were you all able to prepare a questionnaire, or was it a court questionnaire, or?
We had input on it.
It was a collaborative effort, and I'll tell you that it was that questionnaire was consistent with and symbolic of the state's entire theory, and that it was just general, as big and complicated as they could make it. was the closest thing they could get to a conviction, because if they looked at just my client and what happened on that day at 12:30 on a Sunday in Waco, they couldn't get there from here.
Whether there was any evidence of him regularly or continuously engaging in criminal activity.
And that's what they hung up on. Where's the first time Jake was ever arrested was Twin Peaks. You know, he's been a bandito for 5 years. And look, if you live in Texas, the banditos have an unenviable history. That is the God's honest truth.
Yeah.
But Thomas called it a legal fiction. What we saw was these ATF and other law enforcement experts coming on and reciting historical fact.
When are we going to get past this idea that law enforcement can teach law enforcement about, gangs?
Sort of regurgitating each other's ideas as experts, but they're using historical facts to say that today, Jake Cowhersall, who's been in this club for 5 years, is somehow criminally responsible for something that happened when he was 2. So they had to stay open to this idea that a club could change, that people can change. I'm better today than I was 10 years ago. Are you? I mean,
I met Casie about 10 years ago, and I will tell you, she is a much better person today than when we were hanging out.
I appreciate that.
Speaking of crazy jury charts, I tried a case with Casie about 8 or 9 years ago, and I was making pluses and minuses, and it was my first jury trial ever probably, and we're sitting there and discussing the jury and making our strikes, and she says, "Damn it, JV, your notes are supposed to make sense." And I'm like, "I don't know what I'm doing. I'm so sorry." But I imagine you did better than that.
Oh, no, not much better.
No, of course.
Right in the same boat. I'm so sorry. Don't hurt me anymore.
The jury questionnaire thing is interesting to me. I mean, because you brought in a panel of 300. Mm-hmm. It is rare to get jury questionnaires like that in state court. But I think it was just the two of y'all, right? I mean, did you have any other support staff?
We did have a big support staff, actually.
We did.
How many people?
My investigator was there. We had a fellow named David Devereaux, who is he's actually the spokesperson and founder of the Motorcycle Profiling Project. And
Will Delaney,
who is he's a professor at the University of Alabama, that were critical, certainly in my learning curve, like understanding this community. And I can sit before you today and say that I still don't completely understand this motorcycle community, but that was kind of our theme. You don't have to.
And David and Will were so instrumental in at least getting us up to speed on that.
How long did y'all get to question the panel?
It felt like a week. I think the state's voir dire took a whole day.
Wow.
It was painful.
You didn't do a whole 300? No.
No.
I mean, how did they brought in pieces and?
Well, no. Okay, yes. So we had the entire 300 in one room, and there were these crazy pillars that you couldn't even see past. I had a microphone, like a cordless microphone, to walk around the room so that the court reporter could hear what these folks were saying in response to the questions. And it was just, I mean, you've heard the state's voir dire. It just, the one-way kind of droning. We were all falling asleep. I was in the middle of the group, like literally The Price is Right.
What is this puzzle? Do you recognize this as a puzzle of a gun? But there's some pieces missing?
Did you call them out on that? Or is the prosecutor saying, "What does this look like?"
No, it was all of the standard canned things that you've ever seen from a state's prosecution, I saw in this case. I've also never seen as much blatant perjury. Just, I mean, as an officer of the court, you know that we're all held to a higher standard. And the ease at which officers of the court, prosecutors, would lie was breathtaking to me. Just tells me they've been doing it for a very long time without consequence.
Well, and they didn't turn over a bunch of evidence to you. Then they turned some over after you start trial. And then I still question whether or not you really ever got everything, because
I haven't.
The feds have probably held back some stuff that you are likely entitled to, that they weren't willing to give up on this deal.
That is a true story.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you this, Jimmy, the things that were turned over to us in the middle of trial, if they had given that to us prior to trial,
it would have affected your
They couldn't
strategy.
they couldn't have put their case on. Those experts that testified about what this conflict was really about, every single piece of late disclosed evidence undermined their theory of prosecution. Well, every single piece.
And then you have prosecutors on the record making an argument that, well, I didn't believe this witness, so therefore I don't have to give this piece of evidence to you.
It was Kelly Siegler all over again. Like, if she thinks they're crazy and don't make any sense, then then you're not entitled to it, defense attorney.
Terrible. Terrible. Did the jurors pick up on that?
Yes, they did.
They did, and we were lucky enough. Well, we forgot to mention Vivek Chimpala. He was another co-counsel. He was, very active, making a record of, keeping track of all of these issues throughout the trial for us.
So we both had our own appellate section. So the state did, and then Vivek was ours. But they could not have tried this case the way they wanted to if they had given me that evidence. Mm-hmm. And I saw this. So the first chair in McLennan County is this guy named Michael Jarrett, and I did see a shift in his behavior midway through trial. Like, at one point, I'm getting records middle of trial from DPS, and Michael's looking at them, and I can tell from his face he's never seen them before.
Wow.
So it's not just McLennan County. The bad guy in this entire prosecution is the Department of Public Safety.
Well,
that would be DPS.
And you issued subpoenas on this stuff, and,
Many.
They were quashed.
Yes.
And it was more than that, though, because at one point Michael was saying, well, Judge, we'd like that too, and he was corrected. And
elected DA comes in and says, "Oh, we've already received that." And no.
Really?
So there were filters of information. So DPS would generate it, and DPS is boots on the ground for any federal investigation in Texas.
Sure.
Have you seen the federal indictment for the Banditos case out of San Antonio?
Long time ago. Okay. I haven't looked at it recently.
Is that the one Schaefer was on? No.
Yeah, Schaefer was on it, and I think Dick DeGuerin is now counsel for Jeff Pike. So it tracks all of these predicate acts from 2013, gets all the way up to Waco, skips it, and then continues.
Ha!
Interesting.
Yeah,
just hanging
it is
low.
interesting, isn't it?
Wow. So they just decide to omit that blinders on. Well, because it was such a poorly investigated case. I mean,
Or the setup didn't go the way they wanted it.
exactly. And they don't want it to turn all that over.
You think it was set up? I thought it was just masterminded by Abel.
No, the surveillance footage from the surrounding businesses around Twin Peaks, I can see a DPS agent walking bikers who have taken their cuts off the scene, letting them leave, and then walking some back in. And then when I cross-examined him at trial, I'll put it to you this way, there wasn't a DPS agent that testified truthfully. Not one of them. And so I don't know what the real story is, but I am chomping at the bit to find out. They haven't said whether or not they're going to retry Jake, and I represent his father as well. Mm-hmm. And so one or the other, I'd like to get to the bottom of it.
So when do they have to make their decision to retry him or not? I mean, where's the case stand procedurally right now?
I'm pretty sure Michael Jarrett would chew his foot off before he gets back in a courtroom with me.
Yeah. So, I mean, do you have a status conference or anything on it, Seth?
Nope. And strangest thing ever, if you've ever had a mistrial or something, the trial ends suddenly, the judge will remind the defendant that you're still on bond. These are your conditions of bond. You have to show up to court this day. Judge Johnson was like, y'all have a nice weekend.
Ha!
We left the courtroom without a court setting.
We left McLennan County.
quickly, without a court setting, without an admonishment, and Jake admitted that he'd managed to go from vice president to president of his chapter, even though the bond conditions were he wasn't supposed to be associating.
But yeah, right. So you see the jury. What's your opening like? What the evidence?
I reserved my opening.
You reserved it?
Yes, sir.
Yep.
I think I just remembered that you actually did that.
I mean, looking back is the only way to do it, right?
Yes.
The narrative was changing throughout, over the first 4 weeks of the state's trial.
I couldn't. Look, I knew going in I was going to be doing pretrial discovery in the middle of trial, and I wasn't going to tie myself to a story. Mm-hmm. On some level, like Jake, when he testified, he had an over-under Derringer that his dad had given him years ago that he carried with him when he rode. Hardly the weapon you carry if you're walking into a war.
Right.
And at some point, I don't know if the state thought that we were going to lie about that or not admit that or what, but all of those bullets that were fired, but they had an ATF expert that, Thomas actually questioned, never identified a weapon or a bullet that killed which person. I had to do that. The defense had to do that. And that's stuck in the jury's craw. Like, why didn't they tell us which bullets who killed who?
Right. Well, so was it just an engaging in organized criminal activity charge, or were there additional counts as well?
Jake had, originally it was just the 2 counts of engaging, first one being murder is the underlying, 9 counts of murder, second one being 18 counts of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. And then, what did we do?
They called it a superseding.
Well, yeah, they called it a superseding. We had done something, I don't remember at this point what it was, but they re-indicted him and added the directing a criminal street gang, which is 25 to life. And for a man that's,
36 years old?
barely gotten a speeding ticket in his life, that's a scary proposition. 2 young children. There were some scary times there, even as weak as the evidence was.
I think I asked you this earlier, and it's something to clear up. They actually had to plead the manner, the manner and means for everything.
Yeah.
That's amazing. And they had to read this out in open court.
The entire thing.
And we did not waive reading of the indictment.
How long did that take?
About 30 minutes.
Jeez.
Both times, pre-trial and during trial. You wrote it, you can write it.
What?
Did you get any kickback from waiving the open? That's pretty bold. That's huge. I mean, somebody had to have told you, what the hell are you doing?
Did you?
I got a lot of kickback about a lot of things.
Oh, fair enough.
The case, so May of 2015, right? 177 folks charged. Nobody managed to go to trial. Like, nothing was happening. And so I'm Johnny come lately. I show up in March of this year and just do the thing that I do, and that's get to trial. And made a lot of lawyers unhappy about that. Like, I'm being irresponsible, and this should be bikers versus law enforcement, and what is she doing? And it's just, you know what it's like. You to drown out the noise and do your job.
Let me ask you this. You said, what is she doing? That goes back to, like, you said it. I mean,
It's true.
It's like,
It's true.
It's a male-dominated field. You're blazing a path. Like, you're number one, you're advocate. Like, I mean, you probably did something that 99.99999% of the individuals, humans on this, who are licensed in the state of Texas, much less licensed in the planet, did. Did you, I mean, how did you, I mean, and you're sitting there and you're defending this guy, this dude with this huge presence and everything, and the only thing between him and the government is you.
Yes.
And Thomas.
Hey, and Vec.
Yes.
But yeah, well, I can speak about that a little bit, and I would disagree that people were looking at Casie like, she did that. And what I mean by that is we had to recuse the first judge involved in the case. And all of the people that had been pushing that issue were all female attorneys, strong, powerful female attorneys that had been pushing that issue and fighting to recuse that original judge in that case. And actually it was kind of a moment of epiphany for a lot of these biker dudes, and they're looking around and all of the entire thing is being run by female attorneys.
It was Susan Chris,
right.
I forget the other young woman's name, and then, so it was 3 women that were doing it. So much for that.
How did you handle that pressure? Just as an advocate,
So,
like, everybody's eyeing in on you, the entire state is watching you, and you wave open. And you go, how did you deal with that?
I don't read the paper. I don't answer my phone. I rarely check emails. When I'm in trial, and my analysis stops and starts with the human being sitting next to me. He's going home to his family. Hell or high water, that is happening. So I don't listen to the bullshit that comes from the lawyers around me that have a different opinion and don't think that I know. I've done my homework.
And to a large extent also, on day 2 of the trial, that entire issue of us waiving our opening was moot because of the way that the testimony with the experts played out. And I mean, this is your story. To me, this is the best part of the entire case because it was hilarious. But how did you tell that story of how that whole thing went down?
How did you know that this trial was going to be also? There's a big component of receiving discovery during the trial. Like, how did you know that was going to happen?
So, a couple of things. For as old as this case to have been, right? Where's the rest of the discovery? What was clear to me within a month was that the only way we're going to get this evidence is to get to trial. And so I'm not asking for a continuance. I would complain often about not getting what I'm entitled to, I'm not asking for a continuance because your constitutional rights, you get them all at the same time, like one big aromatic bouquet. And I'm not waiving speedy trial to get Brady or due process. I want them now.
Judge, she's been given everything.
Yeah, we dispatched with that. But it was clear that the only way we're going to get 177 people and you haven't gotten one of them to trial in 2.5 years? No. And I was also mindful of the fact that that federal prosecution was coming. And you know, statistically speaking, what trials in federal court look like. And that ripple effect, I wasn't having that. A Bandito was going to go to trial before that federal case went.
Well, how? Because I know Paul Looney was trying to get his client to trial, and even earlier than your case. How was it that you managed to get ahead of him with all his screaming and yelling?
A little bit of blind luck. And this was actually one of the judges that had presided over an early recusal hearing. My predecessor was a man, his name escapes me, Landon. Northcutt. And what the judge that presided over the recusal hearing had determined, or his observations were, that he's known Landon for a decade and has never known Landon to ever be ready for trial a day in his life. And so from the outside, what it looked like is that the state picked the lowest hanging fruit, the weakest lawyer, and said, number one with a bullet. And then, much to his chagrin, I got shifted in at the last minute. And they just, within 3 days of me signing on, they started crawfishing, like, there's federal evidence, we need a continuance, or...
We need to assert Michael Morton for the state, because, there's evidence out there that could be maybe, favorable to the defense, so we're asserting it for him.
So to answer your question, Jimmy, yeah, they think that Michael Morton entitles the state to favorable evidence. I know, it's breathtaking.
That would explain why Abel Reyna is under investigation himself if that's the way he thinks.
Is he though? He's a target, is he not?
He's the target of a federal investigation. That's pretty much clear. And we've reached the halfway point of the show, ladies and gentlemen, so we're going to open up the phone lines. If you want to call in with your questions, comments, 713-807-1794 for Casie Gotro and Thomas Lane. Reminder, Twitter's also up at HCCLA_TV. But how is that going to play out? He's now, it looks like he's been recused on some cases. We've got special prosecutors on a few.
He got recused, so...
How's that going to play out with y'all's case?
This is not going to sound good. Reyna was one of the prosecutors in Jake's case. And at the same time, Clint Broden is kind of agitating from the backside. And he gets Doug Shaver and still has Reyna on the case. Well... Reyna files for a continuance because he's in the middle of Jake's trial, and Shaver denies it. He says, you've got 38 prosecutors over there, send another one here to try it. Reyna then voluntarily recuses the DA's office from the Broden prosecution. To me, based on the DPS evidence that I got, Michael Jarrett's surprise, it seems that Reyna's the one that's been doing the filtering. If I have to speculate about that.
Oh, and that's not surprising. Look what's come out in these affidavits about him currying political favors for people, dismissing cases, going into prosecutors' offices, ADA's offices, and saying, we're not prosecuting that, or evidence all of a sudden going missing in certain cases or being ignored. So, yeah, it seems like he wields a pretty heavy control over that office.
He does, and there was no way he was going to let some other prosecutor from his office start monkeying around with this evidence. Like, he's the sole custodian of it.
So let's say, for instance, we've got how many special prosecutors do we have now?
With 4.
4?
Yeah, there are 4 of them. They just added Mandy Miller.
And
Mandy Miller's a special prosecutor?
Yes. He's one of them.
So, and I don't know where the investigation may be going or may be headed, but I'm guessing with 176 people still to possibly tried. That's not going to happen anytime soon. At some point, perhaps the Reyna investigation gets to a point that, I don't want to speculate, but it could lead to a removal?
Well, I'll tell you.
Altogether.
So the special prosecutors, I emailed Froze Merchant and said, I don't really know what the rules are about defense attorneys talking to special prosecutors, but I'd like to talk with you and to show you what the problems are and where you need to start digging. And then I met with Brian Benkin, Brian Roberts, and Froese the night before one of Broden's hearing. Clint Broden was with us, and just laid out what I see. This is what DPS is doing. The elected sheriff of McLennan County, 3 subpoenas I issued for him. Not once did he show up, and one of them was a trial subpoena. Has never produced a record, has never even bothered to come to court. It is the most brazen disregard for law I've ever seen.
And the judge just didn't do anything about it.
So Strother didn't. By the time we had gotten, the recusal hearing ended, and then the next day we're doing voir dire. And it was, again, I'm with the understanding that I'm going to be conducting pretrial discovery during trial. Didn't get to revisit it, so it's one of those things that fell through the crack. But he just flat out refused to show up.
And how did that affect, I mean, in terms of your cross-examination of the state's witnesses? There's always, everybody comes up with their rules that they try to teach you, which you're supposed to abide by, which is never ask a question you don't know the answer to. Never ask an open-ended question. I mean, it seems like with what you're telling me, that really had to all go out the door. And it was basically like taking a deposition in a civil case is what it sounds like.
Correct.
Ow.
That's so dangerous.
To who?
At this point, it didn't sound like you had anything to lose. Though.
To who? I am.
Yeah.
It is a rare circumstance where the guy sitting next to me has no exposure. Like, legitimately did nothing wrong except what any man in that circumstance would have done. And so I won the lottery with respect to my client. And that was actually part of my closing argument. The state had been pushing this theory of you're either coward or criminal, failing to recognize that Jake's dad was there, rode in with them. His uncle, both men are in their 60s and overweight, outnumbered 8-1. What's he supposed to do, run for the hills? No. We're not going to do that. And so that was absolutely self-defense. And knowing Jake, the way that he's built, he couldn't have looked himself in the eye the rest of his life if he'd run away from that situation.
Let's get into that.
He did nothing wrong. So I could ask open-ended questions. It was either going to be some more baloney from the ATF about something that happened 20 years ago and all those men are dead or in prison. But it didn't have anything to do with Jake.
Yeah.
Or the Dallas chapter.
We got a phone call, so let's get a question in here. Hello, thanks for calling Reasonable Doubt.
Yeah, is that me?
It's you.
Yeah, I'd like to know when the book is coming out about this thing, because this is a perfect Michael Connolly sort of book, and that's just an observation. And my question is, how much of this is politically inspired of this confusion, or is in Waco politically inspired, or just stupidity? Do they feel like they're going to let all of this, just run the boards and people will forget about these guys that are in jail? And I'll just get off the air and wait for the answer. Thank you.
Thank you. As the collage of Casie
faces.
Casie.
I make funny faces.
The many faces of Casie.
I make funny faces.
I need a poster of that. I need yes.
Hallelujah.
I'm going to tell you that in all the years I've practiced law, I've never given a closing argument in a red suit.
Yeah.
And I did that for the sole purpose of saying, am I arrestable? Am I now a known associate? Because this prosecution, and this answers, I think, the caller's question, is what I see is government suppression of political speech. You're saying you don't like the colors I'm wearing and the people I'm associating with, and so in response, you're going to prosecute me. You can't do that. You have an absolute right to associate with like-minded folks, and that's what these people are doing, and that's it.
Was that the subconscious theme, or what was that an actual defense to your case? So you talk about what you were arguing in closing. Did you receive any special instructions? Did you receive any instructions, and did you raise any defenses, or was it just the underlying theme of, hey, look, these guys, you're profiling them, you are running this sham investigation, and you have no proof? I mean, were there any defenses raised, And did you receive any instructions from the judge, or was it more of a?
So there were at least 2 men that were walking towards Jake, firing their weapons, and came narrowly close to killing him before counter snipers dropped them. So on at least 2 times, Jake's life was saved by the police before he'd even thought to reach for his Derringer. I mean, he is on the ground 4-to-1 fighting for his life. And so the self-defense was absolutely in. The defense of third was absolutely in. The officers who fired those weapons actually testified that, yes, they were firing in defense of that man on the ground that these guys are coming over to shoot. And so the story is real simple. There has to be room for courage. And the state wants you to accept this idea of coward or criminal or this bandito boogeyman, and that's not what this was about. That is not what this was about.
How long had the federal indictment been pending at the time of the Twin Peaks incident?
It had not.
So it wasn't under seal or anything?
It had not. They were still investigating. So Twin Peaks happens in May, and then January, I think, 6 of 2016. So like 6 months later, the federal indictment drops.
But they had been investigating the events since 2013, according to the federal indictment.
The indictment tracks. And what's really curious about it is that, so the Banditos have, it's called the Defense Fund, because their members are being targeted for associating. And so the state and the federal government have tried to paint that into this nefarious
money laundering,
we're defending criminals. No, we're defending ourselves from an overzealous government is what we're doing. In the federal indictment, they actually mention a conversation. They mention a conversation where they're talking about increasing dues for their members because how many banditos were arrested and held on $1 million bond?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a worthy cause to fight. That's a worthy cause to fight, I think.
Is Abel Reyna a fall guy for something else or something bigger? I don't know. I just kind of think like Abel Reyna couldn't either. He completely screwed this whole thing up, or because of this other Fed investigation, this other kind of thing on the backside, going back to what the caller was talking about, there's some sort of politics or something else behind him that he's going down for it, and he's involved in it, but he's not smart enough to pull this off, or he's not smart enough and just screwed the whole thing up.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I understand from the people that I know who are from Waco, Reyna, before he got elected DA, had no background in criminal law. You know anything about that?
I thought he was a criminal defense attorney for a long while.
I know he had
a private practice, and I think kind of along the lines of what we had talked about a couple weeks ago, there was kind of this perhaps good old boy system, the way things worked out in Waco. I'm not sure that he ever really did any heavy lifting on the criminal defense side, but his family was very well connected politically.
We certainly got the story about his grandfather, great-grandfather that went from janitor to judge or something like that.
Yeah.
But
mops to, what did Castro say? Mops to politician, the whole rags to riches, the whole I'm a Mexican, but now I'm an American. Oh, I'm sorry, no.
We're done with that.
Yeah, no. We were talking about it last week, though. At the same time, though, the guy's wearing some $40,000 Rolex.
Bennett noticed that. I hadn't even noticed it.
I think escapes Mark.
It's no nice watches escape Mark.
The whole thing was bizarre. The whole thing was bizarre. And you led the way through the whole thing. And Thomas, which is amazing to me. It's just amazing. So what? So you're there for 2 or 3 weeks. Neither of you live in Waco.
7.
yeah,
Pardon me.
yeah.
7 weeks.
7.
Neither of you live in Waco. What? And so you guys you're holed up and you're doing this movie thing where, like Matthew McConaughey and who Sandra Bullock are, cracking fish and drinking beer and talking about the case for like 7 weeks of it?
Casie was a den mom for 7 weeks.
I did feel like I was running a frat house because like me and then the 2 motorcycle experts and then my co-counsel. So I was the only woman in the house with like 6 guys. We come home from court. There's no beer, toilet seats up, like, where's dinner? I mean, it was just, yeah, I needed like a chair and a pitchfork at some point. But they were a hell of a team, and they were a hell of a team. Like, we couldn't have did what we did without y'all.
Did you think in Waco, when you all were living there for the months that you were there, that people recognized you, that you...
Oh, yes.
Absolutely, yeah.
Really?
Yes.
Absolutely.
The people that would just come up to us, like restaurant owners or
On the street.
ladies walking their dog,
Yeah.
and the kindest words, we're so sorry that this is happening to you. They touch Jake's beard. We're praying for
He does
you.
have a nice beard.
They talk about Raina's cocaine habit, which I thought was so bizarre because
Wow.
the first time I'd been to Waco was my first appearance on this case. I don't know anybody. I don't know the local lay of the land. But everybody talked about this cocaine habit that the DA has. And it's the damnedest thing.
That's amazing, because I think we have a caller.
We do. It's amazing that we have a caller. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I was kind of trying to transition, but that's why you're the point. You know what I mean?
I know. Okay, we got another call here, so let's get to their question. Hello, thanks for calling.
Hi, thank you for taking my call. This is so educational, hearing about the blatant disregard for the law that y'all had to go through. And
Well,
your
Julio's
guest,
colored amazed that
Casie,
you even called, so,
Casie mentioned that her subpoenas weren't followed by the judge, that they were just blatantly disobeyed. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what the subpoena is, why it's so important, and what a lawyer can do in that kind of situation when the judge refuses to enforce a properly filed and served subpoena. And I'll take the answer off air.
Thank you.
Recuse the judge.
So in our case, I'd had such difficulty getting discovery. And there's this legal fiction that 3914 is the only, that the Michael Morton Act is the only way to get discovery. I filed like 10 subpoenas and didn't get responsive documents. So I started off in this hearing trying to, file a motion to compel responsive documents. And for reasons I will never understand, Judge Strother said, I'm not going to enforce your subpoenas. In fact, I'm not going to read what was produced or even your subpoena. I'm just going to rule for the state.
Wow.
But were the subpoena...
Led right into the recusal of Judge Strother.
Immediately.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the subpoenas were going to state agencies?
Yes.
Okay. So theoretically, under the new Michael Morton Act, 3914, that stuff should come to you via discovery, right?
Should.
So, I mean, it's amazing to me that the judge wouldn't even enforce it through that way, through the statute.
And who was moving to quash? Was the district attorney's office acting as the agents for those agencies?
So interestingly, when we were in front of Judge Strother, it was the district attorney that was moving to quash these subpoenas because by all accounts, I mean, I often felt ganged up on. Mm-hmm. Like I was fighting two prosecutors, and I said that to Judge Strother. Like, I don't trust you. He would tell me to be quiet. I can make my record later, and I don't believe you. And then when I tried to make my record, I was like, this is why I don't believe you. You don't tell the truth. When we got in front of Judge Johnson, Matt Johnson, I will say, one of the fairest trials I've ever gotten, like just balls and strikes. I have no complaints about him. By the time we got in front of Judge Johnson, the DA's office wasn't moving to quash subpoenas. DPS was coming in.
Or the city attorney.
Or the city attorney.
Wow, really?
And moving to quash their own subpoenas. So Thomas and I did a little recon ourselves. I'd gotten invited to a Sunday coffee with a lawyer for the Attorney General's office that is representing some DPS agents. Mm-hmm. And because he'd been so dishonest with me, we recorded the conversation.
Wonderful. Absolutely wonderful.
And then in the course of this hour and 20-minute recorded conversation says that you're right. Raina's not giving you everything. Just said it. I don't know that I believe him. I think it's self-serving. I think they're both lying weasels. And when the ship goes down, they start to cannibalize and jump ship. So they're equally culpable.
Did you have people pointing fingers later on?
Absolutely. They're doing it now. They're going to poke somebody's eye out. They're doing it right now.
I mean, what a train wreck. Just
It was a fun train wreck, though.
Well, I mean, just the way this case is being handled. I mean, it seems like it's just been bungled from the beginning by the state.
Can we say the government? Can we say the government? Because
Sure.
honestly, I can't prove this, but everything that I have seen and circumstantially, Waco was part of that federal investigation, and something went wrong somewhere, and Waco got stuck holding the bag. Whether Reyna reached for it or it was dropped in his lap, he's got it now. He's got it. And because the feds are keeping their evidence as close to their vest, because they can, because there's no discovery in federal court, and hell, you can't even subpoena a federal agent to show up without the government's permission.
Right.
So as long as they sit up there in their ivory tower and they hide that evidence, we're never going to know. We're never going to know what happened. And so people like Abel Reyna and what's going on in Waco, it gets to keep happening until our federal government gets checked, because they are out of control. Just this idea that you have to have their permission to subpoena them. So if you let the ATF do all your ballistics testing, then a defense attorney can't even subpoena that guy to show up and explain what the hell he did.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's terrible. It's absolutely terrible. What is this? What is this? I saw that movie. Have you seen that movie Atomic Blonde?
I have not.
No.
Yeah, I saw it. It's all about like the government covering everything, and then it turns out the CIA is behind everything. And I'm thinking to myself, this is what's going on. Federal government's behind everything. There's money going in places that we have no idea where, and there's people making decisions that we'll never know about, and nobody knows anything. And Abel Reyna got stuck holding the bag, and Casie Gotro came in there and shook some stuff.
I want to come back to that your thought on that in a moment, but we got another call coming in, so let's jump on the phone line here and get another caller in. Hello, thanks for calling Reasonable Doubt.
Hey, thanks for taking the call.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's been a great show. I have a couple questions for Casie. I'm curious how much you think the state's case will change if they decide to retry Jake, and also if you think there's potential for the state to have conflicting theories of prosecution for each of the other 150 some odd defendants.
Thanks for the call.
So, number one, I do not believe that this district attorney's office is going to re-prosecute Jake Karzal, given the material misrepresentations and outright lies that some of those folks told during trial. They've made themselves witnesses in any further proceedings. So I don't think this DA's office is going to re-prosecute Jake. I think any DA with eyes and ears and a working brain that speaks to the jury, looks at the evidence that was brought in at trial, will dismiss 98% of these cases, Jake's included. There are some folks who were there that day engaging in organized crime with the specific purpose of mayhem, hurting people. And there could be some successful prosecutions. There's a man named Jesus Rodriguez. He is on camera, plain as day, being shot in the back through the heart, and then again in the face, and then stomped in the face by two men that are clearly identifiable. Why is that prosecution not first?
This is after, I might add, he is responding.
He's not even in a club.
Yeah, he's
a Vietnam vet, a Purple Heart recipient.
And he is responding to men firing into a crowd, and takes it upon himself to go and throat punch and attempt to disarm one of those men.
Shot in the back, shot in the face, and stomped in the face. And the man that did it, his name is Jacob Reese, and he's a Cossack. And it's plain as day, it's on the poll cam. Why is that prosecution not first?
Yeah.
Cold-blooded murder at noon on a Sunday in Waco.
You got it on video.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And his cohort was later killed by the police as he attempted to shoot Jake as Jake was on the ground. But you prosecute Jake Karzal first because he's a bandito.
Yeah.
Sort of feeds into that same idea of there's just some federal machination going on here.
Well, when's the federal case set to go to trial?
February the 12th, I think. It's in early February of 2018.
I mean,
In San Antonio or here?
San Antonio.
San Antonio.
That's amazing. This whole thing's just absolutely amazing. It's one of the things they're going to be having trials, like mock trials, 30 years from now about, I think.
Well, I mean, it's not. To me, it's not all that surprising. I mean, the feds have probably invested a lot of time and resources into their case, a lot more than DPS and Reina's office have, and I don't think they're going to be. I mean, this is just my theory, that they probably are going to, as you suggest, take the low-hanging fruit rather than potentially expose some of the key witnesses in a federal trial to cross-examination in a state case.
Yeah.
I mean, why would they allow that to happen? And so, like you're saying, there probably is some manipulation behind the scenes.
Yeah, and I want to say that the DPS agents, they were a significant part of the federal investigation. So they were kind of wearing two hats.
Yeah.
I have some correspondence between Reina's office and DPS where Reina was attempting to get evidence favorable to the state's case, mind you. He never made a Brady request for a defendant, and was told that a lot of what we have is under federal protective order. And so they are, in fact, the Department of Public Safety. I believe the director's name is Tim McGraw. They are sitting on evidence.
Yeah.
And they're just not turning it over.
I think we have one more call. Let's try and get it in here before we go. Hello, thanks for calling Reasonable Doubt.
Stephen McGraw, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I have two questions.
You can only have one. I'm sorry.
Okay.
No,
well,
just
you can pick which one you want to answer. So the first one is y'all were talking about the federal government and the federal government's reach, and I understand that. What do you think, or how much, or do you think there's any culpability on the part of local law enforcement who was there that day when this whole thing happened? Is that a sign of something else that we see going on in society this day with law enforcement all across the country? And then the second question is a little bit more personal to Ms. Gotro. What was it like for your client the moment that the judge declared the mistrial? How does he feel today? How does he feel after that? I know you can't say personal things and privileged things that y'all talked about, but how is he feeling after this whole thing? Because it was hard for you, and you've already said it was really hard on him. So how did he react afterwards?
thanks for the call. We only got about a minute, guys, so be brief in your answers.
I think local law enforcement did everything they could with the information they had.
Agreed.
They absolutely saved lives that day, and they just walked into a mess.
One of the SWAT officers had said that his rifle wasn't even in the ready position. He had it in the back seat. So I think that local law enforcement had been misled as well. And with respect to Jake, it's hard to describe. He has two boys. They are 8 and 11, Dylan and Jackson, and it's hard to describe what it's like to have to say goodbye, right? When to hug them and know that might be the last time you see them. And so, relief, elated, happy. I'd like to keep him that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, and there's a picture of you and your client.
Jake.
Yeah, I mean, hey, look, a lot of people don't really understand, but a mistrial that's huge, especially in this. I mean, a lot of people will say, well, and they'll come up with some excuse. But the reality is, that's a big deal. It's a really, really big deal.
And this is where my ability to tune out those naysayers really comes in handy. And that was a win for us. That was a win.
So I appreciate that. I appreciate you guys coming on the show and sharing your stories. We gotta wrap this thing up now. But Thomas Lane, Casie Gotro, appreciate you guys coming on, sharing,
Thank you for having us.
taking the time this week and telling us all about Waco. Julio, settle down on the turkey, man.
I got goosebumps from the show.
All right. That's all the time we got, ladies and gentlemen. We'll be back next week with another new episode of Reasonable Doubt. Check us out on Twitter and Facebook for all the latest episodes and updates. That's it for tonight. For Julio Vela, I'm Jimmy Ardwan. See y'all next week. Good night.
Peace. Look, I'm